It's lily pad removal day at Mill Lake. Pretty fancy machine. Here's the latest project at Balmer's workshop. 1975 Ford Econoline 250 van. We are going to do, hello Jerry the dog. We are going to do a custom rear bumper, and that custom rear bumper is going to have a swing out tire carrier. If we can, we're going to have the tire mounted in front of this door in such a way that it doesn't block the tail light and still allows this door to open. Whether that's completely feasible or not, I don't know yet. That's the spare tire. It barely fits, judging by a couple of quick measurements, but we'll see what happens once we get a little further down the road with this thing. So it's going to have a swing out tire carrier. It's going to have some receiver hitches. It's going to have one in the center, obviously, for towing, and then it's going to have a receiver hitch on either side. And the reason for that is he wants to add a great big cargo basket later on down the road, probably something to support around 500 pounds. So it's going to need some serious structural support for it, and that's why we're going to do dual receivers on the outsides of the bumper. We'll do a little bit of a wrap around the outsides, probably to around this line here, and we'll have it protrude, I would think, about 6 or 7 inches out past the back of the bumper. If I do go with the tire carrier, or sorry, the spare tire mount here, it'll be in front of the license plate, in which case I'll do a license plate cutout in the bumper. And obviously add some lights in there as well for it. But if the tire doesn't work out there, then what we'll do is we'll basically center the tire or make it just slightly offset to this side so that we don't have to add a license plate mount to the bumper. And in that case, we'll have a full-length solid bumper with the 3 receivers, maybe some recovery points. We'll see if the customer wants them. And we're going to put a little hose bib on there because he has a hot water shower, as you can see right there, that he can hook up for outdoors. So we'll just put a hose bib into the bumper to make that a little bit custom. The brackets are the first things that I'm going to design. I've already made a very rough cut of some plastic that I will use as a mock-up for them, but I need to cut these wires and get them out of the way in order to place that mock-up in position. So I have cut out my brackets to a rough shape that I like, and I have figured out my bolt hole locations, and I have drilled them. And I'll show you how I went about doing that. I cut out a very rough mock-up out of coroplast. I like using coroplast rather than cardboard because it holds its shape much better, and it's just much more precise. So anyway, I cut a rough shape out of that. I made some 1/2-inch holes with a die grinder through my my mock-up template, and I bolted it into place through the big hole in the frame there using a backing plate with a nut welded to it. So that's how I hold it in place to get my holes marked on the frame. I marked them initially with a white paint marker so that I can see what I'm doing, and then I use a black sharp pointed felt pen to mark the actual hole location, and then now I've gone ahead and punch marked them. So I'm ready to remove this mock-up, plastic mock-up, and drill those holes out to 9/16. We'll be using 1/2-inch bolts, so I'll give myself a 1/16 of an inch wiggle room. And then what I'll do is I'll create steel brackets out of these. coroplast mock-up of my rear bumper bracket. I can show you here that I've got my markings for where my upper receivers will mount, where my 2x2 support will mount. That's going to be what braces those receivers, and then the lower toe receiver. There's an added 1/2 inch needed below that, and I have included that on the actual metal versions of these mounts. I've also put rounded corners on them and just cleaned them up a little bit. And there they are. These are 1/4 inch mild steel mounts. I've rounded out the corners on them and made it look half decent. And I added that lower section there. You can see on my mock-up it just is flat on the bottom, where this guy I've added this lower section here, and that gives me my nice 45-degree angle for the bottom of the bumper, and that will also allow me enough room to put my receiver against there and possibly weld it right to this bracket, or we might come further out this way. I'm not totally sure yet. Probably it'll wind up going against that bracket. But anyway, I've gone over more or less how I decided to make those brackets up. We came up with a good bolt pattern that spread the forces as well as possible while still giving me access to the back side and everywhere in every location. We've added those nice little 45-degree angles to give a clean look once we skin this thing with some steel. And now I need to do just that and start creating a top plate and all of the outer shell for this thing. So I've placed a piece of aluminum flat bar over the top, and my reason for doing that is so that I can figure out how wide I want my bumper to be. And in order to do that, I just take a piece of coroplast. I use coroplast so I don't scratch the vehicle, place it against the side of the vehicle, look for where it intersects with that aluminum flat bar, and mark that point. Then of course I go over to the other side of the vehicle and do exactly the same thing. And when I measure between those points, I have my actual vehicle width, which in this case is 74 inches. I want my bumper to be wider than the vehicle, obviously, so I add about 2 to 3 inches per side. So in this case, I'll add 6 inches total, bringing me up to 80 inches. And then I need to figure out how deep I want the bumper to be, or how far out of the back of the vehicle I want it to protrude. So I simply measure the top of the top plate and take that into account. And then I have to remember that I want my bumper to go forward of that point so that it wraps around the sides of the vehicle. And we talked about that line, which is just where I'm putting the tape measure there. And that gives me a 13-inch depth overall. So now I'll go ahead and cut out an 80 by 13 inch rectangle from my coroplast, and I've got my basic mock-up shape. From that, of course, I have to cut a recess into it so that the bumper mock-up fits around the back of the vehicle, and I'll mark a center line and work outwards from that center line. The vehicle was 74 inches wide, so I'm going to go 75 inches with my recess that I'll cut out to give myself a little breathing room with that, and then I'll cut a couple of angles so that I don't wind up with big voids in those square corners. And test fit it, find that I need to cut a little bit more out of those angles, and do so. You see here that I'm using a 6-inch cutting disc to mark a radius on there. That's what I think we'll wind up with as probably our final dimension, but I don't want to cut all the way back to that just in case it isn't right. So we'll have a little test fit in real time now. So I made those cuts and I left the corner in there, but I marked a 6-inch radius. 6-inch diameter, I guess I should say, so 3-inch radius. And it looks like a really nice fit once I cut that portion out, so I'm probably going to be quite happy with that. We're at the very backs of our brackets now, so we're exactly in place. That's how far forward, if I could speak that'd be good, the bumper is going to go. We're virtually centered there, and we're just touching the sides. So at this point, I'm almost happy with that clearance, so I really don't want to go any wider than that. So again, had I cut this rectangle out, I mean, look at how that would have really ruined that whole piece. So what I'll do is I will go from the end of the radius there to the end of the bumper there, and make a nice straight line, giving myself about a consistent 1/2-inch clearance from the side of the vehicle to the edge of the bumper. And where the straight line meets that curved radius, I'll just feather that out into a nice smooth bend so it looks good. And that's really about it for the top plate. From there, we'll move on in the next episode to creating the rest of the shape of the bumper, and there's some critical stuff in there that I want to point out to you as well. But at least now you've got the foundations. You know that you start with either a cardboard or preferably a coroplast mock-up of your brackets. And then you create a steel version of those brackets right away so that you have a very rigid platform on which to build your top plate. And now you know how to build a top plate, you know what parameters to use, and in the next episode we'll get on to building the rest of the mock-up so that we can then get on to the good part, creating the steel bumper itself. But thanks so much for sticking with me here at Balmer's Workshop, and do come back next time. Best way for that is to subscribe. Please comment, please like, and we'll see you again next time.